May 17, 2014 will mark the 60th anniversary of the 1954 Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Board of Education. The ruling from the Supreme Court struck down school segregation. But some say if we look at the progress of school desegregation today, there is still much work to be done. Here with us is Professor L'heureux Lewis-McCoy, Ph.D. He is a professor of sociology and Black studies at City College of New York and the author of Inequality in the Promised Land. Also with us is Halley Potter. She is a policy associate at the think tank The Century Foundation. And welcome to both of you to Arise America. Welcome back to you.
Thank you for having us.
So glad that you could be here. And this is a very important discussion to have as we as we celebrate and remember this landmark decision that affects really the civil rights of all of our children. I think, L'heureux, I want to start with you and ask you just to talk about on the continuum, what progress have we made and maybe even taken back since this decision?
Yeah, I think in 1954, when Brown was decided, it was so important because it also set in motion the modern civil rights movement. And what that meant was that people were talking about education and talking about inequality. And what they did was, of course, try to desegregate schools. But starting in about the 1970s, there was strong resistance to that. Many parents, many districts suggested that the government shouldn't tell them how to live, right, and how to decide where they go to school. And so what we've seen in the past 40 years is a retrenchment, really a resegregation in schools, so that now when we look at the data, particularly UCLA, the Civil Rights Project has found that schools are now more racially segregated than they were in the Jim Crow South, which is really troubling.
It's absolutely astounding to think of that. But if you just look around in our own communities, it's very easy to believe, isn't it, Halley? At this time, this is a good time to reflect upon what as it relates to this decision.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to look at how this affects their own communities. And I think sometimes people are really surprised to look at what demographics of schools that may be across the street or just a mile apart look like. And you'll often see that housing patterns have something to do with the segregation here, and people often think that segregated neighborhoods is the reason that we have segregated schools, and that's certainly part of it, but school segregation goes beyond even that now, and we see a lot of times there's de facto segregation that has to do with parents jockeying into different schools or how boundaries are drawn, and so we really need to make progress beyond just having this legal end to segregation to think about practical ways that we can create and maintain that diversity in our schools.
And I would say almost immediately after this decision, there became ways to find loopholes or ways around this, and the so-called school choice for individuals to be able to choose using public dollars with vouchers and charter schools and all these kinds of things. Did those things on the whole kind of run into the face of what the Brown decision was really meant to mean?
Absolutely. I think the Brown decision was trying to say when students of different backgrounds sit together, they have an opportunity to learn, to experience each other. What happened with an advocating of student choice was often those who had more financial means were exiting the public schools. They were trying to create a separate world. And then we also had the Supreme Court, which started to turn back the logic of Brown and say, you know what, if you use race to think about desegregating schools, it inherently is discrimination. So when you have advocacy for choice for those who have more money, and the Supreme Court saying that considering race is discrimination, you have a recipe for trouble.
And not to mention just segregation in general, but also the achievement gaps that exist amongst races and socioeconomic groups.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's interesting that we've seen as we've moved past Brown versus Board is really there should be a push to think about diversity in a number of respects. And the achievement gap, when you look at the achievement gap that we have between poor students and rich students in this country, it's twice the size of the black-white achievement gap. So while we still need to think about racial diversity and how that affects opportunities that students have, we also have a huge socioeconomic picture that needs to be brought in when we think about what it means to have diverse schools and what it means to be giving students of all backgrounds equal opportunities.
And I think, Halley, the truth is, and I'm sure you would agree with this, L'heureux, that the new ism, if you will, the new bias in our society, in addition to race, because racism is still there, is classism.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say that race and class have always been there. When we had segregation, of course, it was keeping African Americans away from economic resources. And while the socioeconomic gap has widened, and we can look at that in test scores, when we look at things like the suspension gap, the gap in access to gifted and talented programs and advanced placement, we see race playing a major factor. So part of it is being sensitive to class, but also how race and class interact.
I wonder, L'heureux, what's your perspective on this? I've heard some of the old folk in the African American community say that black kids in the time of segregation were often educated at a higher level, got a better quality education than black and brown kids do today. What's your perspective on that?
Well, there is some truth to that statement. One of the things that happened in the segregated South were that many of the educators were local in the community. And when we look at what happened after the Brown decision, many black women teachers were laid off. The schools that were colored schools were the schools that were closed. With that being said, that doesn't mean all of these schools were doing well. So what we've moved away from is high quality education and local education to integrating systems, and often with folks who don't necessarily want to have children sit together.
And before we stop this discussion, I want to talk to you, Halley, or both of you, about how the Brown versus Board of Education decision has rippled beyond public education.
Yeah, I think we need to think about this, about education moving beyond high school, and especially thinking about post-secondary options. You know, we know that achievement gap that we see at K-12 is affecting kids' chances in college, and I think we're increasingly seeing moving beyond high schools, looking at college and seeing really a lot of inequalities there, both in terms of access and then the resources that different institutions have to serve sometimes the neediest populations at community colleges are asked to be served with the least amount of resources.
Yeah, because the truth is you're just laying a foundation with the public education.
Absolutely, and higher education is often the path to opportunity. And if we know schools are segregated and unequal at the K-12 level, getting access to higher education for diverse students matters. And that's why the Brown decision has also been instrumental in affirmative action cases, as recently as the one that happened less than a month ago with Michigan. And so we have to go back to the logic of Brown, of making sure that all students have access, and the consideration of race, so that we have greater opportunity and greater diversity in K-12 and higher ed.
Yeah, the law is being upheld, but the spirit of it has to be upheld.
Absolutely.
L'heureux Lewis-McCoy, Halley Potter, thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this is Women's Health Week, and each night we focus on a different health issue affecting women. We continue tonight with the topic of fibroids, very familiar to a lot of us. 20 to 80% of women develop fibroids by the time they reach 50 years old. Women who develop symptoms often find fibroids hard to live with, cause pain, and heavy menstrual bleeding. Well, here with us to discuss this important topic is Dr. Taruba Prabhakar. She is a OBGYN at Maimonides Medical Center and attending physician and fellow in minimally invasive gynecologic surgery. I dare you to say all those words. And Jessie Thompson is the author of Hope Beyond Fibroid. She is a former patient who suffered with infertility and is now a fertility coach. Welcome, ladies, to Arise America.
Thank you
so much for coming. We've got a lot to talk about in, unfortunately, a short period of time. But Jessie, I want to start with you with your story. And as I read about it, it's just incredible what you've been. How bad were fibroids for you?
It was huge. All along the 10-year journey, it really was the hurdle I kept having to fight. You know, I had 3 myomectomies, and each one ended up with complications where I had to have another surgery. So you're talking about a 10-year battle, 5 major surgeries, and then I had a miscarriage because the infertility ensued, so I had to do IVF. It wasn't just something that affected me where I just had to have the myomectomy. Now I had restricted options for having a child, so I had 5 IVF cycles. And then my heart stopped on the table in the surgery. But I have a miracle baby.
Yeah, and you're really jumping over the story. A lot of people know. I want to stop and just point out to some viewers who don't know medical terminology.
Absolutely.
Myomectomy is a surgical removal of the fibroid without removing the entire uterus.
Correct.
And I just want to take a moment and pull out something in your story. You know, through all of these courses of IVF and your myomectomies, these surgeries to treat the fibroids, they would come back, and they come back
every
worse.
Every 4 and 5 year cycle. That's why I said it was like this hurdle I kept having to fight.
Did it take over your life and how you felt as a woman?
It became worse every time. It was at the point where, you know, I work with a nonprofit called the White Dress Project because we talk about wearing white, which I'm wearing today, because the last go round, I was hemorrhaging so much. You can imagine what that means. You know,
yes.
You didn't feel like you could wear white.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Exactly.
And so I want to bring you in, Doctor.
Yes.
So first of all, so many people, so many women, particularly women of color, have fibroids. Let's just talk about what are they and why are they so overrepresented in African American women?
So fibroids are benign. They're muscle tumors that grow in the wall of the uterus. They can be inside the uterus as well as right outside the uterus. You're right in that it is overrepresented in women of color and especially African African Americans. But unfortunately, today, even with all the research that's going on, we don't know, we can't pinpoint one reason as to why this is. There are some genetic factors, some environmental, but there's a lot of research still going on.
I mean, honestly, I don't think I've ever met a black woman that didn't have fibroids.
Right.
It seems
So
like we
true.
all have them, but
Absolutely.
when do they become a problem? When
Right.
do they pose a health risk?
Right, so it actually start right in the early 20s and go on to the 30s and 40s. But in black women, oftentimes we see it in the childbearing age, which is the mid-20s. They present with pain, bleeding, and depending on the location of the fibroids, can certainly be a problem in terms of fertility.
And I remember when I was growing up, and even in my earlier adulthood, talking to women who were dealing with those extreme fibroids that you've
Absolutely.
dealt with. And there were two options. You either dealt with it or you got a hysterectomy. There's a lot more out there, a lot of other options out there now.
Absolutely, and very fortunately so. So you can do medical management in terms of, birth control pills or Lupron. And as you mentioned, the other extreme was hysterectomy for those who really had extremely big fibroids. But thankfully today we have options like uterine artery embolization and most importantly, minimally invasive surgery for just the fibroid removal, which is a myomectomy. We use the laparoscope, we use the robotic platform today, and that's what I do. And it's absolutely wonderful. Women can go home the same day and return to work and get back their lives.
Truly, the good news is that there is hope, and I know that that's
Absolutely.
your message now,
Yes,
Jessie. Before we
absolutely.
talk a little bit about your new mission in life because of
Yes.
your experience, you have a beautiful little girl who is the living, breathing example that there is hope. I think we have a picture of her. Let's put Nia up. So you finally got pregnant after
Yes.
how many rounds of IVF?
5 IVF.
After 5 IVF rounds, and then at 21 weeks, I understand that you found out that the fibroids were literally sucking the life out of your baby.
Literally, she was fighting for her life.
And so
correct.
you went on bed rest, hospitalized bed rest.
She was my doctor, caring for me in the hospital, yes.
Yeah, for
fantastic.
I
2
think
months.
for 2 months, and then gave birth to Nia prematurely.
Healthy, strong, feisty, but tiny.
But why is this important? So this really has changed some of your mission in life and what you
Absolutely.
do. Why is it so important to minister hope to women who deal with fibroids?
You know, when you're going through something so traumatic, sometimes you don't realize the impact you can have on other people. And when Essence, was gracious to allow me the platform to share my story, and it's in the May issue of the magazine, they actually touched on something that it became a rippling effect. Women all over messaged me. It was like 33,000 likes on their Facebook page. They were messaging not just their comments of, this is good, but oh my God, you gave me hope that I don't have to give up. So now we formed this Circle of Hope prayer group for them. And we're writing this book, Hope Beyond Fibroids, because the key thing is we want to tell all their stories. When I hear women say, my God, you don't understand, I was ready to give up. I was that one IVF cycle away from giving up. And because I heard a story that encouraged me, I didn't give up, and I have the greatest miracle for it.
And that's what I want to ask you finally, Dr.
Yes.
Prabhakar. Is Jessie the exception or the rule? She had extreme fibroids and was able to have a baby. Is it possible for those women out there who have similar circumstances?
Yes, and this is what I do every day. We operate on women with tons of fibroids, large fibroids, walking around for years, and there is definitely hope with all the options available today. Early detection, awareness, and treatment.
Hope. That's what
Yes.
we brought here today. Dr. Charuba Prabhakar and Jessie Thompson. Thank you both.
Thank
and
you.
congratulations on that beautiful
Thank
girl.
you. Thank you so much.
Take care. And you're watching Arise America.